to NewsX World. I'm Pia and you're watching The Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Tensions, diplomacy and shifting alliances continue to reshape the Middle East as new peace frameworks take root and old hostilities resurface. The region stands at a delicate crossroads. Humanitarian concerns, the future of Gaza, the expansion of the Abraham Accords and a disturbing rise in anti-Semitic violence worldwide are all converging into one complex moment. The implementation of the first phase of the 21-point peace plan has created a rare window of relative stability, even as challenges on the ground persist. Questions over long-term reconstruction and shifting geopolitical alignments continue to test the durability of this fragile calm. At the same time, the world is witnessing a troubling surge in anti-Semitism, from attacks on synagogues to escalating hate online, raising urgent questions about safety, accountability, and global responsibility. Joining us now is a very special guest, Rabbi David Rosen, a prominent British-Israeli rabbi known for his work in interfaith dialogue, holding the titles of both a papal knight and a commander of the British Empire. He served as the chief rabbi of Ireland from 1979 to 1985 and currently works as the international director of interreligious affairs for the American Jewish community. His extensive work includes negotiating relations between Israel and the Holy See and promoting understanding across different faiths. His deep insights into regional diplomacy, religious engagement, and the fight against anti-Semitism makes him a uniquely positioned individual to help us unpack the complexities of this moment. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time and speaking to us.
A pleasure.
At the outset, we've seen the implementation of the first phase of the 21-point peace plan, which was floated by US President Donald Trump. This has helped stabilize the volatile region of the Middle East to quite an extent. In your assessment, are the elements of this plan, including the establishment of an international stabilization force, enough for lasting peace? And if not, what else is required?
Well, first of all, I should clarify that I am not in politics, nor I am in political journalism. Therefore, my comment can only be as a citizen of this country and an observer, and therefore does not necessarily have any special weight. But I would say that the plan, as it has been outlined, is a very good plan. And in principle, it should be able to not only bring about stability, but even lead towards a regional peace process that would help resolve the Palestinian issue and establish relations between all the countries of the region, Israel and all its neighbors, and hopefully usher in a new era of productivity, security, and flourishing for the whole region. What needs to be done is there needs to be the will to implement it. In other words, it's fine on paper. There doesn't seem to be an indication that enough commitment is being made on the ground to ensure that it is being carried out. And I hope that that will happen soon. And if there is that will, then I think it can be a very significant change of direction for the region as a whole.
Absolutely. And speaking of peace in the Middle East, we saw something rather landmark a couple of years ago with the signing of the Abraham Accords. In that context, I wanted to understand, do you see a scope for the expansion of these accords? Because last month, Donald Trump had announced that Kazakhstan is set to join the accords. There were also murmurs that Saudi Arabia was eyeing the same as well. However, the latter did decide to separate its defense dealings from the accords itself. What is your assessment?
Yes, and let's talk about Indonesia as well. I think that if the conflict in Gaza can be put behind us and the Trump plan is seriously embarked upon, there's no question that the countries you've mentioned and I've added to would be very interested in expanding that relationship. They have a lot of interests in good relations with Israel, economic, strategic, geopolitical, and therefore it's not a matter of any act of kindness, it's a matter of enlightened self-interest that will lead to its expansion. But there needs to be a clear end to this conflict, and there needs to be some path and track indicated, at least, at the very least, towards negotiations with the Palestinians, towards the goal of establishing two states, and there may be beyond that some kind of regional accord.
Indeed. Apart from all of this, we've seen a spike in anti-Semitism since the outbreak of the war, whether the recent terrorist attack at a synagogue in Manchester, which took place on the holy day of Yom Kippur, or attacks in Boulder in Colorado, Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. Are we then seeing a disturbing pattern of such incidents where Jews and Jewish places of worship are being targeted? And if so, what is really driving all of this?
Yes, this is a complex question. In other words, more correctly, the answer is complex. I mean, anti-Semitism is a very resistant virus within society, especially in Western society. One needs to bear in mind that there are at least 2,000 years of prejudice against Jews and Judaism. And even where people might think that consciously they have moved away from this prejudice, it is so deep in their psyche and in the cultural mentality that it erupts quite easily. And human beings have a very profound need for a scapegoat. The Jew has always been the traditional scapegoat in many places and throughout most of history in the Western world, and especially within European society. The Jew has been the only other. And people will generally prefer to find some external cause for their difficulties rather than admit to their own failings. So there's that fundamental reality of anti-Semitism. It remains a resistant virus. It can be controlled, but it will, from time to time, in different places, it will erupt if it's stimulated enough. Today we have another dimension, and that is the conflict here, which serves as a kind of a lightning rod for all kinds of frustrations that exist, especially within the Muslim world and in the Muslim Arab world at large. And these frustrations find Israel a very convenient target. There's also a certain anti-Americanism, which is also behind that. But there's a complete, then, confusion of Jews as a religious, if you like, ethnic community globally, and of Israel specifically. You don't see any outbreak of hostility towards Christian orthodoxy because of the Russian conflict with Ukraine, or hostility towards Buddhism or Hinduism because of the conflict in Sri Lanka, or any of these other conflicts. So this is a very interesting conflation. And it is a little bit mystifying, in addition to the explanation I've given. I mean, if you take the terrorist attack by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, even before Israel had retaliated, so Israel was completely the victim of this terrible attack, and thousands killed and raped, and this brutality. And yet, even before Israel had retaliated, you had a global upsurge of hostility against Israel, and often targeting Jews as well. This suggests that there's some kind of coordination behind it, certain amount of financial interests on the part of elements that are hostile towards Israel, that are already prepared and have nurtured hostilities in different parts of the world. So it's complex. There's a historical dimension, there's a sociological dimension, and there's a political dimension. You ask, is this a sign of things to come? Yes, probably. Unfortunately, today in synagogues and Jewish community centers around the world, they have to have security which they never needed to have in the past, because we live in a very different world. And let me just add, finally, this is not exclusively a problem for Jews. We have a situation where security is a problem generally, where today, as opposed to in the past, almost any nutcase can get hold of means of violent destruction to be able to cause a lot of havoc and a lot of harm. So we are, our world at large, in a situation of where we are facing more attacks on religious institutions and community centers, and where we need greater security.
Indeed, sir, and I also wanted to understand to what extent really does public discourse, especially anti-Semitic rhetoric online, play in fueling anti-Jewish hatred that manifests in such terror attacks?
enormous role, and so-called social media, which very often is more anti-social media in terms of the way it leads to more conflict between people than bridging contacts between people, is a very powerful tool, and anyone can exploit it. So we no longer have communication tools in the hands of those who have been trained or with a decent education and the capacity to make a judge between what is true and what is false, and to be able to make these necessary judgments. Today, all kinds of bias and prejudice floods the communications and the various channels, and therefore people get reinforced in terms of their prejudices. And this does not just in relation to Jews, it's in relation to other communities, whether Hindus or Christians or Muslims. There's all kinds of hatred spewed forth on the communications media, on so-called social media in particular, and this reinforces prejudice, bigotry, and encourages violence.
All right, sir, one last and final question. This is pertaining to the recent visit by Pope Leo XIV. He's recently visited Lebanon, where he relayed his message of peace and unity in the Middle East. Notably, this was the first visit by the Pope to a foreign country after he's taken charge. As someone who's helped build relations between Israel and the Holy See, in your assessment, what role can religious institutions, including the Vatican, really play in advocating for peace and justice in the region?
Well, I think the role of religion is enormous and enormously important. It can be a tool for increasing conflict, exacerbating prejudice and hatred, and it can be what it should be, a very important tool for emphasizing the humanity of all people, that we are all God's children, that we have all responsibilities towards one another, that we should live in amity, that peace is a fundamental value as well as justice and righteousness. And therefore, if religion is to be true to itself, it must be a vehicle to promote these values. Now, all that is in theory. In practice, we have to deal with the fact that religious life lives within the context of communities and their social and political reality. And when communities feel threatened, then inevitably religion tends to play a role more of nurturing the identities of the people involved, bringing comfort and solace. And sometimes, in order to provide that justification, it also leads to self-righteousness, even demonization of the other. International religious bodies can play a very important role in terms of bringing the different parties together, and the Vatican in particular. Pope Francis made a demonstration in bringing the three different religions, main religions in the Holy Land, together in the gardens of the Vatican for prayers for peace, and I was privileged to lead the Jewish prayers, but it was a one-timer, and there was no sustained development. And therefore, if the Vatican really wanted to, I believe it could play a very important role to help open the different sides to the conflict to a recognition of the attachments of the other, to the importance of their place in this land that we all share, at least religiously, and a need to be able to advance reconciliation. And I hope he will do that.
All right, with that, I'd like to thank you, Rabbi David Rosen, for taking out time and speaking to us on The Focal Length. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on this episode of The Focal Length. For more